The lights dimmed on the set of The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. And in that moment, Dakota Johnson did what no Hollywood starlet was supposed to do. She told the truth. "Actually, that's not true, Ellen," she said with a smile so sweet it could have fooled anyone who wasn't paying attention. "You were invited." The clip would go viral within hours, watched by millions who suddenly realized they were witnessing something rare in Tinseltown. Authentic rebellion disguised as politeness. But this wasn't just another celebrity moment gone viral. This was Dakota Johnson, granddaughter of Alfred Hitchcock's muse, daughter of Hollywood royalty, and the woman who would become both blessed and cursed by embodying one of the most controversial characters in modern cinema. In that single exchange, she revealed something the cameras rarely catch: the sharp wit of someone who grew up seeing through Hollywood's beautiful lies. The entertainment world had been watching Dakota since she was born, waiting to see which version of the family legacy she would inherit. Would she follow the path of her grandmother Tippi Hedren, the icy blonde who captivated Hitchcock? Or would she mirror her mother Melanie Griffith's trajectory? Brilliant, beautiful, and ultimately broken by the very industry that made her a star. What they discovered was something entirely different. Dakota Johnson wasn't trying to repeat family history. She was rewriting it, one brutal truth at a time. Behind the doe eyes and the demure smile was a young woman who had learned early that survival in Hollywood meant knowing exactly when to bite the hand that feeds you. That moment on late-night television was just the latest chapter in a story that began long before Dakota drew her first breath. In a family where scandal wasn't an exception. It was the rule. From her great-grandfather's mysterious death to her mother's very public struggles with addiction, Dakota was born into a legacy where fame and tragedy were inseparably intertwined. But to understand how Dakota Johnson became the woman brave enough to call out Ellen DeGeneres on national television, how she navigated the treacherous waters of being Anastasia Steele while maintaining her soul, and how she continues to survive in an industry that has devoured so many of her family members, we must first understand how it all began. The story starts not with Dakota, but with the ghosts that haunted her family tree. Ghosts that would shape every decision she would ever make, every role she would choose, and every moment of defiance that would define her career. In Hollywood, some children are born with silver spoons. Dakota Johnson was born with a red rope around her neck and spent her entire life learning how to breathe anyway. October 4th, 1989. The date marked not just the birth of Anastasia Dakota Johnson, but the arrival of Hollywood's most reluctant princess. She entered the world in Austin, Texas, as if the universe knew she would need distance from the epicenter of entertainment industry madness that ran through her veins like an inherited disease. Her mother, Melanie Griffith, was already an established star, riding high on the success of Working Girl and basking in the glow of her relationship with Don Johnson. But success in the Griffith Hedren lineage had always come with a price tag written in heartbreak and headlines. Dakota's birth certificate might have listed her as simply Dakota Johnson, but she was really born Dakota Johnson Griffith Hedren, carrying the weight of 3 generations of women who had learned that beauty was both blessing and curse in equal measure. The Texas setting was no accident. Melanie had fled California, seeking some semblance of normalcy as her due date approached. But you cannot run from genetics, and Dakota's DNA was a cocktail of artistic brilliance, mental illness, addiction, and an almost supernatural ability to attract both adoration and destruction. Her great-grandfather had died under mysterious circumstances. Her grandmother Tippi had survived Alfred Hitchcock's obsessive control and a lion attack that nearly killed her. Her mother was already showing signs of the substance abuse that would plague her for decades. Even as an infant, Dakota seemed to understand that her family's love came with conditions and cameras. Baby photos from those early months show a child with unusually alert eyes, as if she was already calculating the angles, already learning to read the room. Those who knew the family whispered that Dakota was different from the start, quieter than expected from a child born into such chaos, more observant than seemed natural for someone so young. The signs were there from the beginning, scattered like breadcrumbs through her early childhood. While other toddlers played with toys, Dakota was drawn to watching the adults around her, studying their faces, learning to recognize the difference between genuine emotion and performance. She was 3 years old when she first wandered onto a movie set, not to play or explore, but to sit silently in a corner and observe the strange ritual of grown-ups pretending to be other people. Could this early exposure to the performance of identity have shaped Dakota's later ability to navigate Hollywood's treacherous social waters? Or was she simply born with the survival instincts necessary for someone destined to inherit such a complicated legacy? By age 5, Dakota was already displaying the sharp intelligence that would later make her impossible to manipulate. When photographers tried to pose her for adorable celebrity child photos, she would comply with a politeness that somehow managed to be subtly mocking. Even then, she seemed to understand that she was part of a show she never auditioned for. Her early years were spent shuttling between her mother's increasingly chaotic world and her father's more structured environment. Don Johnson, himself no stranger to the darker side of fame, tried to provide stability, but even he couldn't shield Dakota from the reality that normal was not a word that applied to her family. Normal children don't have paparazzi following them to school. Normal children don't have to learn to smile on command before they can properly tie their shoes. The most telling moment from those early years came when Dakota was 7. At a family gathering, someone asked what she wanted to be when she grew up. While other children might have said actress or just like mommy, Dakota's response was chilling in its precociousness. I want to be honest. It was the kind of answer that makes adults laugh nervously and change the subject quickly. But those who really knew Dakota understood that this wasn't childish naivety, it was a survival strategy. She had already figured out that in a family where everyone was performing all the time, the only way to maintain any sense of self was to cling fiercely to truth, even when it made everyone else uncomfortable. The foundation was being laid for the woman who would one day sit across from Ellen DeGeneres and calmly call her out for lying. The child who wanted to be honest was already learning that honesty in Hollywood wasn't just radical. It was practically revolutionary. By the time Dakota reached adolescence, the cracks in her family's glamorous facade had become impossible to hide. Melanie's struggles with addiction were making headlines, and Dakota found herself thrust into the role of the responsible one at an age when most children are still figuring out who they are. She was 13 when she realized that she might be the only member of her family capable of surviving Hollywood without losing her mind. High school should have been Dakota's escape from the intensity of her family legacy. But instead, it became the battleground where she first learned to fight for her own identity. Enrolled at the prestigious Crossroads School in Santa Monica, she was surrounded by other children of celebrities, but even in that environment, Dakota stood out for all the wrong reasons. While her classmates were content to coast on their parents' fame and connections, Dakota was asking uncomfortable questions and challenging teachers who expected deference from the daughter of movie stars. She wasn't interested in playing the role of the sweet, compliant celebrity child. Instead, she was developing the razor-sharp wit and fearless honesty that would later become her trademark. The rebellion started small, arriving late to classes, questioning assignments, refusing to participate in the kind of networking that other Hollywood offspring embraced as naturally as breathing. But it escalated quickly when Dakota realized that the education system, even at an elite institution, was designed to create compliant workers, not independent thinkers. The breaking point came during her junior year. Dakota had been assigned to write an essay about her role model, and instead of choosing a safe, expected figure, she wrote about her grandmother, Tippi Hedren's courage in speaking out against Alfred Hitchcock's harassment decades before the Me Too movement made such revelations socially acceptable. The essay was brilliant, fearless, and absolutely inappropriate for a high school assignment. When the teacher suggested that Dakota might want to choose a more positive role model, something inside her snapped. This was the moment when Dakota Johnson learned that truth-telling in her world wasn't just discouraged, it was actively punished. Her response was to become even more defiant, more willing to challenge authority, more determined to speak uncomfortable truths. The inevitable explosion came when Dakota organized an impromptu protest against what she called the performance of education at Crossroads. Standing in the courtyard with a handful of like-minded rebels, she delivered a speech that was equal parts brilliant social commentary and adolescent rage. "We're not here to learn," she declared. "We're here to practice being fake for the rest of our lives." The administration was not amused. Neither were many of the parents, who had paid substantial tuition fees expecting their children to be molded into polite, marketable versions of themselves. Dakota was suspended, then eventually asked to leave the school entirely. But here's what makes Dakota's story different from typical tales of celebrity offspring gone wrong. She didn't interpret her expulsion as failure. She saw it as freedom. At 17, she had already learned the lesson that would define her career. Sometimes the only way to maintain your integrity is to walk away from situations that demand you compromise it. The decision to pursue acting wasn't born from childhood dreams of stardom or family pressure to continue the legacy. It came from a much more practical place. Dakota realized that acting was the only profession where her inability to be fake might actually be considered an asset. If she was going to spend her life performing anyway, and as a member of the Johnson-Griffith Hedren dynasty, performance was unavoidable, she might as well get paid for it. Her early forays into the industry were marked by the same unflinching honesty that had gotten her kicked out of high school. When casting directors asked about her famous family, Dakota would give answers that were truthful to the point of being uncomfortable. "My mother is an addict in recovery. My grandmother was sexually harassed by one of cinema's greatest directors, and my great-grandfather died under mysterious circumstances," she would say with a smile. "But I can deliver lines convincingly." Was this brutal honesty about her family's dark history a calculated strategy to distance herself from their legacy? Or was Dakota simply incapable of the kind of diplomatic dishonesty that Hollywood runs on? The industry didn't know what to do with someone who refused to play by the unwritten rules of celebrity behavior. Dakota wasn't seeking sympathy for her family's struggles, nor was she trying to leverage their fame for personal gain. She was simply stating facts with the kind of matter-of-fact delivery that made everyone else in the room squirm. Her first significant role came in 2010 with The Social Network, where she played a character who existed primarily to be discarded by the male protagonist. It was a small part, but Dakota brought something unexpected to it, a sense of genuine hurt beneath the character's composed exterior. She understood rejection intimately, not just romantically, but existentially. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed by people who were supposed to protect and nurture her. The performance caught the attention of critics who noted that Dakota possessed an unusual combination of vulnerability and strength. She could convey deep emotional pain without ever appearing pitiful, and she could deliver cutting observations without seeming cruel. These were skills that couldn't be taught in acting classes. They were the hard-won lessons of someone who had spent their entire life navigating impossible situations. But the real test was yet to come. Dakota was building a respectable resume in independent films, gradually establishing herself as a serious actress with range and intelligence. She seemed to be successfully carving out a path that honored her family's artistic legacy, while avoiding their personal pitfalls. Then came the phone call that would change everything. The role of Anastasia Steele in 50 Shades of Grey wasn't just another acting job. It was a cultural phenomenon waiting to happen, a career-defining opportunity that came wrapped in controversy and moral complexity. Dakota would have to decide whether she was brave enough to step into the spotlight that had destroyed so many members of her family, or whether she would continue to play it safe in the shadows of independent cinema. The choice she made would determine not just her career trajectory, but whether she could truly break the cycle of self-destruction that seemed to follow her bloodline like a curse. The script arrived on a Tuesday morning in 2013, wrapped in the kind of non-disclosure agreements that usually accompany state secrets rather than movie roles. Dakota read it once, then read it again, and then called her agent with a question that would prove prophetic. "Are you sure this is a good idea for someone with my family history?" She wasn't being coy or difficult. Dakota had watched her mother navigate the treacherous waters of sex symbol status in the 1980s and 1990s, had seen how the industry's obsession with female sexuality could become a prison that was beautiful, lucrative, and ultimately destructive. The role of Anastasia Steele wasn't just another acting job. It was an invitation to become the object of millions of people's fantasies. And Dakota understood the psychological toll that kind of objectification could take. But there was something else in the script that intrigued her. Something that the media coverage of the 50 Shades phenomenon often missed. Beneath the surface titillation, Anastasia Steele was fundamentally a character study of a young woman learning to navigate power dynamics, sexual agency, and personal boundaries. These were themes that Dakota understood intimately, having spent her entire life learning to maintain her sense of self in situations designed to strip it away. The audition process was unlike anything Dakota had experienced. The producers weren't just looking for an actress who could deliver lines convincingly. They needed someone who could embody a character who was simultaneously innocent and sophisticated, submissive and strong-willed, vulnerable and resilient. In other words, they needed someone who understood contradiction as a way of life. Dakota's audition tape was a masterclass in controlled vulnerability. She delivered Anastasia's lines with a kind of quiet intensity that suggested vast emotional depths beneath a seemingly simple surface. When she spoke about Christian Grey's appeal, there was a flicker in her eyes that suggested she understood both the attraction and the danger of men who mistake control for love. The chemistry test with Jamie Dornan was where Dakota truly demonstrated her suitability for the role. While other actresses played the dynamic as straightforward romance or obvious power play, Dakota brought something more complex, a sense that Anastasia was always calculating, always aware, always making conscious choices about how much of herself to reveal. It was the performance of someone who had learned early that survival sometimes means letting people think they have power over you while you maintain control of the things that really matter. When the call came offering her the role, Dakota asked for 24 hours to think about it. Not because she was unsure about her ability to handle the character, but because she wanted to be absolutely certain she could handle everything that would come after. She had watched enough family members get crushed by the weight of public expectation to know that saying yes to 50 Shades meant saying yes to a level of scrutiny that could be psychologically devastating. Her decision to accept was based on a calculation that was both artistic and personal. Artistically, she believed she could bring depth and nuance to a character that could easily become a one-dimensional fantasy. Personally, she saw it as an opportunity to confront the demons that had haunted her family for generations. the toxic relationship between female sexuality and public consumption, the impossible standards placed on women in the entertainment industry, the way that society both worships and punishes women who dare to be sexual beings. The filming of 50 Shades of Grey was an education in maintaining psychological boundaries while portraying their dissolution. Dakota approached the intimate scenes with the kind of professional detachment that came from years of watching her family members struggle to separate their public personas from their private selves. She was able to be present in the moment as Anastasia while remaining fundamentally Dakota in ways that mattered. But the real challenge wasn't the filming. It was everything that came after. The marketing campaign for 50 Shades turned Dakota into a global phenomenon overnight, but not necessarily in ways she had anticipated. Instead of being celebrated primarily for her acting, she found herself analyzed, criticized, and fantasized about in ways that reduced her to a collection of physical attributes and sexual possibilities. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her entire life trying to be seen as a whole person rather than just another pretty face from a famous family, and now she was being reduced to a sexual symbol in ways that made her mother's experiences seem quaint by comparison. The difference was that Dakota had prepared for this possibility, had spent years developing the psychological armor necessary to survive this kind of objectification. Behind all that glamour and global attention, was there an unbearable loneliness that nobody saw? The promotional tour for 50 Shades revealed both Dakota's sophistication and her growing impatience with the industry's expectations. In interview after interview, she answered questions about the film's sexual content with a directness that made journalists uncomfortable. When asked about the steaminess of certain scenes, she would respond with clinical precision about the technical aspects of filming intimate moments. When pressed about her own comfort level with the material, she would deflect with observations about society's strange relationship with female sexuality. But it was during the press tour that Dakota began to develop the persona that would define her public image. The woman who was polite enough to participate in the promotional machinery, but honest enough to let everyone know she saw through it. She would smile for the cameras while delivering observations that were either brilliantly insightful or subtly cutting, depending on the intelligence of her audience. The success of 50 Shades of Grey was both a blessing and a curse. The film made Dakota internationally famous and financially secure, but it also threatened to define her entire career around a single role. She watched as critics dismissed her performance as merely adequate, as if portraying complex emotional states while wearing very little clothing was somehow less demanding than traditional dramatic roles. The sequels that followed, 50 Shades Darker and 50 Shades Freed, became exercises in maintaining sanity while inhabiting a character that the world seemed determined to confuse with Dakota herself. She developed coping mechanisms that were part professional technique and part psychological self-preservation, finding ways to honor the character while protecting her own sense of identity. By the time the trilogy concluded, Dakota had accomplished something remarkable. She had survived being the face of a global sexual phenomenon without losing herself in the process. But she had also learned a harsh lesson about the entertainment industry's capacity for reducing complex women to simple categories. The question now was whether she could leverage her newfound fame to pursue the kind of work that truly interested her, or whether she would forever be trapped in the red room of public expectation. The answer would come in her choice of projects after 50 Shades. Either dies, decisions that would reveal whether Dakota Johnson was truly her own person or just another casualty of Hollywood's ability to transform talented women into brands. The end of the 50 Shades era should have been a liberation for Dakota, but instead it marked the beginning of a different kind of struggle. She had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of global sex symbol status without losing her sanity or her sense of self, but now she faced a new challenge. proving that she was more than just Anastasia Steele in an industry that seemed determined to keep her locked in that red room forever. The projects she chose in the immediate aftermath of 50 Shades Freed were deliberate acts of artistic rebellion. Suspiria, Luca Guadagnino's reimagining of the classic horror film, was about as far from romantic fantasy as Dakota could get. The role required her to embody psychological terror, physical transformation, and emotional devastation, skills that had nothing to do with looking beautiful while being dominated by a billionaire. But the media coverage of her involvement in Suspiria revealed the impossible bind that Dakota now found herself in. Critics praised her commitment to challenging material, but they couldn't resist framing her career choices in terms of her previous work. Every review seemed to include some variation of moving beyond her 50 Shades image or proving she's more than just a pretty face, as if her previous performance had been somehow less valid or demanding. Dakota's response to this coverage was characteristically direct. In interviews promoting Suspiria, she began pushing back against the narrative that her 50 Shades performance had been somehow inferior to her more serious work. "Acting is acting," she would say with the kind of matter-of-fact delivery that made interviewers scramble to justify their questions. Portraying vulnerability and strength simultaneously is not easier just because your character happens to be having sex. This period marked the emergence of Dakota as a public intellectual, someone capable of deconstructing the entertainment industry's hypocrisies while remaining gracious enough to continue working within it. She began giving interviews that were part promotion and part cultural criticism, observations about Hollywood that were sharp enough to draw blood but delivered with such charm that her targets often didn't realize they were being eviscerated. Until after the cameras stopped rolling. The most revealing moment of this era came during a profile for a major fashion magazine. When the interviewer suggested that Dakota was reinventing herself after 50 Shades, she responded with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm not reinventing anything. I'm just refusing to pretend that I ever was the character you all decided I was." It was a statement that encapsulated everything about Dakota's approach to fame. She was willing to participate in the promotional machinery of Hollywood, but she would not sacrifice her integrity or her intelligence to make others more comfortable with their own projections. Her personal life during this period became another battleground for maintaining autonomy. The relationship with Chris Martin, the Coldplay frontman, was subject to intense media scrutiny that seemed designed to reduce Dakota to the role of rock star girlfriend. But those who observed the couple closely noticed something different about Dakota's approach to high-profile romance. She refused to play the supportive partner whose own career was secondary to her boyfriend's. When photographed at Chris's concerts, she looked genuinely engaged with the music, not performing the role of the adoring girlfriend for the cameras. When asked about their relationship in interviews, she would give answers that were both affectionate and boundaried, making it clear that her identity was not defined by her romantic associations. The relationship with Chris also revealed another aspect of Dakota's character. Her ability to find genuine connection with people who understood the complexities of living in the public eye, without losing themselves in the process. Chris, who had navigated his own share of media obsession during his marriage to Gwyneth Paltrow, seemed to appreciate Dakota's refusal to perform vulnerability for public consumption. But perhaps the most significant development of this period was Dakota's growing reputation as someone who could not be managed, manipulated, or reduced to a simple narrative. The entertainment industry runs on the ability to categorize and control its stars, and Dakota had become genuinely unpredictable in the best possible way. The late-night television appearances that made her internet famous were perfect examples of this unpredictability. While other celebrities use talk show appearances to promote their projects and maintain their public images, Dakota seemed to view them as opportunities for spontaneous social commentary. The infamous Ellen DeGeneres moment was just the most visible example of Dakota's willingness to call out hypocrisy in real time. When Ellen tried to create a moment of manufactured drama about not being invited to Dakota's birthday party, Dakota's response was swift and devastating. "Actually, that's not true, Ellen. You were invited." The awkwardness that followed was delicious, not because Dakota was being cruel, but because she was simply refusing to participate in Ellen's performance. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments, or do some people simply learn to cast those shadows more deliberately? The impact of that moment extended far beyond late-night television. It established Dakota as someone who could navigate Hollywood's social dynamics without being controlled by them. Someone who understood the game well enough to change the rules in real time. She had achieved something that very few celebrities manage: the ability to be completely present in promotional situations while maintaining total control over her own narrative. But this level of authenticity came with its own costs. Dakota was increasingly viewed as unpredictable by industry executives who preferred their stars to be more manageable. She was developing a reputation as someone who could not be counted on to deliver the expected responses, to play along with the promotional machinery that keeps Hollywood functioning. The question was whether this authenticity would ultimately help or hurt her career. Could she continue to work at the highest levels of the industry while refusing to compromise her integrity? Or would her insistence on honesty eventually price her out of the kinds of roles she wanted to play? The answer would come in her next phase of career choices. Decisions that would test whether Hollywood was truly ready for an actress who insisted on being treated as a complete human being rather than a carefully managed brand. The years following Dakota's emergence as Hollywood's most unpredictable truth-teller brought a curious kind of freedom that few celebrities ever achieve. By refusing to be managed, manipulated, or reduced to simple narratives, she had created a space for herself that was both liberating and professionally challenging. The industry still wanted to work with her. Her talent was undeniable, and her ability to generate genuine cultural moments was valuable. But they wanted to do so on terms that Dakota was no longer willing to accept. The projects she chose during this period reflected a woman who had learned to prioritize artistic fulfillment over commercial safety. The Lost Daughter, Maggie Gyllenhaal's adaptation of Elena Ferrante's novel, required Dakota to explore the darker aspects of motherhood and feminine desire. Cha-Cha Real Smooth, the Sundance darling that paired her with writer-director Cooper Raiff, allowed her to showcase the kind of naturalistic performance style that had always been her strength. But it was Am I Okay? That perhaps best captured Dakota's current artistic sensibilities. The film, which she also produced, explored themes of sexual identity and self-discovery in ways that were both deeply personal and broadly relatable. Dakota's involvement as a producer revealed her growing desire to control not just her performances, but the entire context in which those performances existed. This shift toward producing was no accident. Having spent years watching other people profit from her image and her talent, Dakota had decided to take more direct control over her career. But her approach to producing was characteristically unconventional. Instead of simply attaching herself to commercial projects that would enhance her brand, she chose material that challenged audiences and critics alike. The decision to step behind the camera revealed another aspect of Dakota's intelligence. She understood that the only way to ensure artistic integrity in Hollywood was to control the means of production. By becoming a producer, she could create opportunities for herself and others that might not exist within the traditional studio system. Her production company, which she established quietly and without the usual fanfare that accompanies celebrity business ventures, focused on stories about women who refused to be defined by society's expectations. It was a mission statement that seemed to reflect Dakota's own journey from reluctant celebrity offspring to autonomous artist. But perhaps the most significant development in Dakota's recent years has been her relationship with public attention itself. Rather than trying to court or avoid media coverage, she has learned to treat it as simply another aspect of her professional environment, something to be navigated skillfully but not allowed to dictate her choices. This attitude was perhaps best exemplified by her approach to social media. While most celebrities of her generation use platforms like Instagram to carefully curate their public images, Dakota's online presence is notably authentic and unfiltered. Her posts reveal someone who is comfortable with herself in ways that seem almost revolutionary in an industry built on insecurity and performance. The photographs she shares are often unguarded, sometimes unflattering, and always genuine. When she posts about her projects, the captions are refreshingly free of the hyperbolic language that usually accompanies celebrity promotional posts. When she shares personal moments, they feel genuinely personal rather than calculated to generate engagement. This authenticity extends to her public appearances as well. At red carpet events, Dakota has developed a reputation for giving interviews that are both charming and completely unpredictable. She might spend 5 minutes discussing the technical aspects of filmmaking, then deliver a perfectly timed observation about the absurdity of being asked to pose for photographers while discussing serious artistic work. The fashion choices she makes for these events reflect the same kind of thoughtful rebellion that characterizes her career decisions. Instead of simply wearing whatever designers offer her, Dakota collaborates with stylists to create looks that feel authentic to her personality while meeting the expectations of high-profile events. The result is a red carpet presence that manages to be both glamorous and genuinely individual. Were these final decisions acts of surrender or courageous acts of self-preservation? Her relationship with Chris Martin has also evolved into something that seems remarkably healthy by Hollywood standards. Instead of the usual celebrity couple dynamic, where one person's career inevitably overshadows the other's, Dakota and Chris appear to have found a way to maintain separate professional identities while building a genuine personal connection. They are often photographed together at each other's professional events, but there's something notably different about their public appearances. They seem to be genuinely enjoying each other's company rather than performing the role of a happy couple for the cameras. When Dakota attends Chris's concerts, she looks like a fan of the music rather than a girlfriend fulfilling an obligation. When Chris appears at Dakota's film premieres, he seems genuinely proud of her work rather than simply supportive of her career. This relationship has also revealed Dakota's ability to maintain her independence while being part of a couple. She continues to travel for work, to make career decisions based on artistic rather than personal considerations, and to speak about her professional life without constantly referencing her romantic relationship. It's a level of autonomy that seems almost radical in an industry where women are often expected to subordinate their careers to their personal lives. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Dakota's current life is her growing role as a cultural commentator. Through her interviews, her social media presence, and her choice of projects, she has become someone whose opinions carry weight beyond the entertainment industry. When she speaks about issues like gender equality, mental health, or the responsibility of artists in society, people listen not just because she's famous, but because she has demonstrated the kind of integrity that makes her observations worth considering. This evolution from reluctant celebrity to thoughtful public intellectual has been gradual and seemingly organic. Dakota hasn't announced herself as a spokesperson for any particular cause or movement. Instead, she has simply continued to be honest about her observations and experiences, and that honesty has accumulated into a form of moral authority that very few celebrities achieve. The question now is what Dakota will do with this authority, this platform, this hard-won freedom to speak truthfully in an industry built on beautiful lies. She has proven that she can survive the entertainment industry without losing herself, that she can be successful without compromising her integrity, and that she can be famous without becoming a brand. But surviving and thriving are different things, and the next phase of Dakota's career will test whether she can use her unique position to create lasting change, both in the projects she chooses and in the way the industry treats women who refuse to be managed. The legacy she leaves will depend not just on the roles she plays, but on whether she can prove that authenticity and commercial success are not mutually exclusive in Hollywood. For a woman born into a family where fame and tragedy were inseparably linked, creating a different kind of story might be the most radical act of all. Dakota Johnson at 34 is not the woman anyone expected her to become. She was supposed to be either another cautionary tale about celebrity offspring gone wrong, or a carefully managed star who learned to play by Hollywood's rules. Instead, she has become something much more interesting and potentially more dangerous. A woman who has figured out how to be completely herself in an industry designed to strip away individual identity. Her current projects reflect someone who is no longer interested in proving herself to anyone. The roles she chooses are driven by curiosity rather than career strategy, by artistic challenge rather than commercial potential. When she appears in independent films like Our Friend or The Peanut Butter Falcon, she brings the same level of commitment and intelligence that she brought to 50 Shades, proving again and again that her talent transcends the categories that critics try to impose on her work. But it's Dakota's approach to the business of being famous that may be her most significant contribution to contemporary culture. In an era when celebrities are expected to be constantly accessible, perpetually grateful, and endlessly accommodating, Dakota has carved out a space for being selectively engaged, appropriately critical, and authentically human. Her interviews continue to be masterclasses in maintaining dignity while fulfilling professional obligations. She has perfected the art of answering questions truthfully without being needlessly destructive, of promoting her work without overselling it, and of maintaining privacy without seeming secretive or hostile. The relationship with her family has also evolved into something that seems healthier than previous generations managed to achieve. Instead of either rejecting her heritage entirely or being consumed by it, Dakota has found a way to honor her family's artistic contributions while learning from their personal mistakes. She speaks about her mother's recovery from addiction with both compassion and clear boundaries. She references her grandmother's pioneering work in animal rights with genuine pride. She acknowledges the family's struggles without being defined by them. This balanced approach to family legacy extends to her romantic relationships as well. The ongoing relationship with Chris Martin continues to be notable for its apparent health and mutual respect. They have been photographed together at family gatherings, professional events, and casual outings, and in all of these contexts, they appear to be genuinely enjoying each other's company rather than performing for public consumption. More significantly, Dakota has maintained her individual identity within the relationship in ways that seem increasingly rare among high-profile couples. She continues to travel independently for work, to make career decisions without apparent consultation, and to speak about her professional life without constantly referencing her personal relationships. It's a level of autonomy that would have been almost unthinkable for women in her mother's generation of Hollywood. The production company that Dakota established has also begun to make a real impact on the kinds of stories being told in contemporary cinema. The projects she develops focus on complex female characters, morally ambiguous narratives, and themes that mainstream studios often consider too challenging for commercial success. But her productions have found audiences, suggesting that there is a hunger for the kind of honest storytelling that Dakota herself embodies. Her approach to producing reveals another aspect of her intelligence. She understands that real change in Hollywood happens not just through individual performances, but through systemic shifts in who gets to tell stories and how those stories are told. By creating opportunities for female directors, writers, and actors who might not find support elsewhere, Dakota is helping to build the infrastructure for a different kind of entertainment industry. What hidden secrets might still remain untold behind their public image? The question of Dakota's long-term legacy is complicated by the fact that she is still actively creating it. Unlike family members whose stories ended in tragedy or cautionary tales, Dakota appears to be building towards something more sustainable and ultimately more interesting. A career that balances artistic integrity with commercial success, personal authenticity with professional obligations, and individual fulfillment with social responsibility. Her influence on contemporary celebrity culture is already visible in the way younger actresses approach fame and public engagement. The generation of performers coming up behind Dakota seem more willing to speak honestly about their experiences, more skeptical of the promotional machinery that surrounds them, and more insistent on maintaining their individual identities even as they participate in the collective fantasy that is modern entertainment. But perhaps Dakota's most significant contribution to contemporary culture is her demonstration that it is possible to be completely honest in Hollywood without being destroyed by that honesty. She has proven that audiences are hungry for authenticity, that critics respect performers who challenge them, and that the industry can adapt to accommodate artists who refuse to be managed. This doesn't mean that Dakota's path has been easy, or that her approach would work for everyone. Her family legacy, her natural intelligence, and her particular combination of privilege and trauma created specific conditions that allowed her to develop her unique survival strategies. But the broader principle, that authenticity and success are not mutually exclusive, has implications that extend far beyond the entertainment industry. The young woman who once told a family gathering that she wanted to be honest when she grew up has achieved that goal in ways that no one could have predicted. She has become honest not just about her own experiences, but about the systems and structures that shape contemporary culture. She has used her platform to illuminate the contradictions and hypocrisies that most celebrities prefer to ignore. Whether this level of honesty is sustainable in the long term remains to be seen. The entertainment industry has a long history of neutralizing threats to its established order, and Dakota's refusal to be managed represents exactly the kind of threat that the system is designed to contain or eliminate. But for now, Dakota Johnson represents something genuinely rare in contemporary culture. A famous person who has figured out how to be completely herself without losing either her sanity or her career. In a family where fame and tragedy have been linked for generations, she may have finally broken the cycle, not by avoiding the spotlight, but by refusing to let it blind her to who she really is. The story of Dakota Johnson is still being written, but the chapters we have so far suggest a narrative that is both more complex and more hopeful than the stories of the women who came before her. She has proven that it is possible to inherit a legacy of talent and trauma and transform it into something entirely new. Not perfect, not problem-free, but genuinely authentic in ways that most celebrities never achieve. In an industry built on beautiful lies, Dakota Johnson has made a career out of telling beautiful truths. Whether she can maintain this balance, whether she can continue to evolve as an artist and a person, and whether she can use her unique position to create lasting change. These questions will define not just her legacy, but the possibilities for authenticity in an increasingly artificial world. If Hollywood is still confused about the difference between truth and performance, just ask Dakota Johnson.